So we told you we have that great conversation. It's been ongoing for the last 1 month, and it's about the referendum taking place on December 17. What it means to vote yes or no. And we know where the protagonists or the antagonists have been or are. It depends on which side of the argument you find yourself. But it's a national conversation that has besieged this country. It's engulfed all of us. It's dominating the various discussion platforms. We're going to have Dr. Emmanuel Akwete, the Executive Director for the Institute for Democratic Governance, IDEC, right in the studio. But also straight away streaming into the studio live is Dr. Charles Wekub-Brobe. We also do know that he's a chief policy analyst with GIPO, but also a great statesman, speaks on various national issues of concern to all of us. We know the stakes are high. It's beckoning. December 17 it is. We're all supposed to go for that referendum to the poll. But we also do know that the district level elections in the Fourth Republic especially have always had a low turnout. It depends on which of the statistics for which of the election years you're looking at. It's always just between that 20, 25, 26, 27, 28% turnout ultimately of the national voter turnout in relation to presidential and parliamentary elections. But this time around, it seemed to have gotten everybody talking. And it's all because everybody has since joined the conversation. We will straight away go to Dr. Charles Wekub-Brobe, the Chief Policy Analyst with GIPO, but also we'll let you in on some of the sound bites of the main speakers, not only serving in government, but also in civil society as well as in politics, who have all been contributing to the discussion so far. Dr. Charles Wekub-Brobe is live. We're live from his home, and we're streaming him right into the studio. And good morning to you, sir. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. How are you, Roland?
I'm good, Doc. And I'm sure...
Very well. Good morning. How are you?
I'm good, Doc. Okay. And I'm sure you've been following the debate so far.
Oh, good morning, Emmanuel.
I would want to ask...
Yes.
I would want to ask you, what have you picked up by way of your own mind you've made up in relation to this discussion about a yes and no, whether the election of the MMDC should be partisan or non-partisan basis, and what really we're going to do on December 17th?
You know, for a country that has elected to practice democracy by multi-party universal adult suffrage, the extension of the concept to the local level or the grassroots level shouldn't really be a problem. It should be no-brainer. We should expect that at every level of governance, multi-partyism should rule. But unfortunately, because of the very toxic tribal practice of multi-party politics in the last 27 years, we seem to have lost focus on what actually constitutes our national consensus and therefore how we should achieve it. If you look at the Constitution on how we should achieve changes and amendments, it's very clear that without consensus in Parliament and amongst the people, it will be very difficult to achieve any amendments. Clauses which are not entrenched require 2/3 of Parliament voting for it, and the clauses which are entrenched, which have to be done by referendum, require that we have 40% turnout and 75% in favor. If you look at this, apart from the second parliament of Ghana, Dr. Buzier's parliament, where the ruling party had 75% of parliament, and the first parliament of the Fourth Republic, where the opposition boycotted and therefore in effect, the governing party had full control of Parliament, you would expect that there will be consensus between our political governance so that changes and amendments to our Constitution would not be a very big fight or degenerate into the tribal, typical NDC versus MPP fight, because that's the surest way in which you not achieve either the 2/3 majority or the 75% vote in favor required at a referendum. So really, I think that the more this internecine warfare deepens, I think the more worrying is this whole concept of a referendum and the outcome, because it has simply become a tribal warfare between MPP and NDC. I would have thought that if the thing had been organized a little bit more consensually, as was done with the creation of regions, I think we would all have agreed, first of all, how the whole process should take place, an implementation plan that ensures that there is a comprehensive agreement on which articles must be changed by referendum and which articles must be changed in Parliament, and there's a program of implementation agreed on a consensus basis, which all of us then will go to vote on. Because really, I really don't think that the way the Constitution is structured, any attempt to inject partisan warfare into it will serve the cause of any constitutional amendments very well.
And we know that at the heart and thrust of all this is Article 55(3) of the Constitution. And I'll take some pick from a lot of writings that have been made, not only by H. Kwesi Prempeh of CDD, but also Samson Ladi Ayeneni and Justice Remsai. Let me quote just Samson Ladi Ayeneni. He says, yes, the makers of the Constitution moved from Article 55(3) to explain in clauses 1 and 2 of Article 248 that candidates at the district level must present themselves as individuals to the electorate, not use any symbol associated with political parties, must also not endorse, sponsor or offer their platforms for campaigns. And if you look at the yeses, so to speak, those who are advocating for a yes vote, the argument is that the district level elections are politicized in a way, indirectly or from behind. Now, the Nowheres also argue that the polarity or the polarization we've seen since 1992 would also mean that when it's a stronghold of what we've seen in the Fourth Republic, the MPP or the NDC, and at least if one is on the seat of the presidency or the executive, and at least they have more of the seats in their stronghold, they will be appeased. Is that a good enough reason then to say that that's a great way for us to politicize or make political party representation at the local government structure?
Well, as I said, from the word go, look, we've elected to use political parties as the instrument of governance. So naturally, that should apply at all levels of governance. The artificial insemination of non-partisan governance at the local government level was a throwback from the old PNDC days, and perhaps because the Constitution was drafted by the PNDC was not going to be changed easily. But having said that, I really believe that, you know, the referendum is flawed in one way. The impression has been given that it is to elect MMDCs, but that's far from the truth. It is actually to decide whether politics at the local level or governance at the local level should be on partisan basis. And I think that confusion has actually introduced a certain amount of mistrust amongst the competing parties. And that's why I said that, you know, the the things you read from Samson and my brother Kwesi Prempeh, these are things which are in the Constitution, but they are not sacrosanct. So I don't think one can make an argument that says because a certain article says this, therefore you must not change. It goes back to the point I was making at the beginning, that there should be an agreement amongst the parties as to what articles which must be changed by Parliament. A very comprehensive agreement, which, you know, for example, I mean, I don't know if Article 24, I think 243 or 243 2C or something. There's an article that says that the DC shall be the representative of the central government at the district. So how do you expect that NDC elected DC to be the representative of an MPP central government or vice versa? So there has to be a very comprehensive look at all the articles which make meaning to the idea of multi-party democracy at the grassroots level. And then the parties should sit together and agree that this is implementation plan that we are going to adopt. Because without consensus, I mean, we can have very nice intellectual debates on who should vote yes and who should vote no. But without consensus, it is not likely that we are ever going to achieve 2/3 majority in Parliament for the non-entrenched conditions, nor are we, if we are going to get the 75% of a 40% turnout, which we require from a referendum. So I wouldn't really want to push the yes or the no arguments at this stage. I think at this stage, my own suggestion would be there's so much mistrust that's been built up. I mean, I've heard some of the speeches that have been made since the very partisan nature of this thing came through. I believe that a lot of them have been unfortunate, knowing that whichever side was making very shrill comments, we're never going to achieve the required majority to change the referendum. My suggestion would be let's pause, let's organize meetings or caucuses amongst all the interested parties, especially amongst the two main opposition parties plus other registered political parties, and then agree an implementation program which allows that all facets of the changes that allow for multi-party involvement at the local level have been taken into account. And then when it is done, an agreement is reached, put it to a referendum or to Parliament, and I don't think there'll be any problems achieving the majorities that are required to effect change in the Constitution.
17 date for the referendum, dates further back.
Yes.
All right.
Well, I mean, there are 17 days. There are 17 days to the referendum, but I can assure you that, never mind the eloquence that is displayed by either side of the arguments, the required majority of 75% of 40% turnout will simply not be achieved, whether it's for yes or for no.
You made a reference before this contribution you made, before I just came in, saying that the parties need to have a certain consensus. And I was reading a contribution for somebody on Facebook, somebody yes. I thought I had been a coursemate with at the University of Ghana Business School, and he was intellectual enough. And the argument he made was that all of us are thinking that because the main political parties represent us as citizens, their contributions and the consensus they would build is representative of the views of the people. But it could be that the ordinary Ghanaian knows what he or she is thinking about a yes or no, or political party participation at the local government level.
I would challenge that assertion. You see, if you read the Constitution, there's a whole section on representation of the people, and it makes multi-party democracy the central tenets of governance in this country. Now, it doesn't take rocket science to say that if we are taking on board multi-party democracy, it should extend to every corner and every facet and every part of our society. And therefore, logically, multi-party practice at the local government level is not rocket science. It's a no-brainer. However, the experience of this, as I said, very tribal and very toxic practice, where, for example, the whole idea of continuum in government has not even been practiced. For example, one government starts a project and then the successor comes and says, well, I will not continue what has been started before. You look at the way in which housing developments have been taken up from Kufuor to Mahama, now back to Akufo-Addo, where there are relics of housing estates standing around because the government that succeeded the previous government did not consider that these were projects that should be done as a continuum. So the whole idea of what constitutes the common good must be agreed upon. I mean, if we decide that we need to go to Kumasi, somebody might choose to go to Kumasi via Yamoransa, somebody might choose to go to Koforidia, somebody might choose to go through Nsawam, but the idea is agreed that we need to get to Kumasi. But we seem to have actually gotten ourselves tied up in such a way that even agreeing what is the common good has become a big problem in this country. And the reality is that as the Constitution now stands, you know, we can argue about the toss, I argue about what is yes and what is no, but it's very unlikely that you achieve the result you desire to amend our Constitution unless there's consensus as to what we are trying to do with that amendment.
Moving forward then, based on the argument you've just made, where should we again reconverge and begin the consensus among the main parties? Because it looks like there's a sharp divide.
You see, the reality, you know, whilst I accept that there are representatives beyond Parliament, the instrument for non-entrenched change is in Parliament. Our Parliament at the moment consists of NDC and NPP. We can convene a national seminar or a national consultative meeting at which we shall invite all kinds of organizations, the chieftaincy, the clergy, the parliament, etc., as which we shall try to achieve a consensus as to what we are trying to do with a constitutional amendment and what the plan should be for its implementation. Once that is done, you know, the work in Parliament becomes rather mechanical because the nation has decided what is there. I mean, you heard the Asantini speaking recently. You have heard various views on chiefs, whether it's yes or no. But we cannot deny the fact that chiefs have a certain role to play in the governance structure of this country. We may be operating a foreign governance structure, but the people of this country, for all that we care and all the education and all the big English we speak, we have a lot of respect for our chieftaincy and its institutions and the role they can play to affect our day-to-day life, and they do play. So I really think that, you know, let's, to use old soldier language, do Azoya, go back to the beginning and start this consultation aimed at achieving a common purpose as to what we are trying to get the amendments for. And then once we've done that, I think we should all, the example of the creation of regions was very clear. Everybody was agreed on the need for new regions, and everybody campaigned for new regions. And in fact, in certain constituencies and certain regions, the turnout was even greater than 100% of the registered vote. So once we are all agreed on a common purpose, I think that in fact, there's been very many amendments to our constitution since '93, but these have all been done in the calm atmosphere of consensus, and it's only now that we are getting into this very, very acrimonious tribal partisan debate, because it is now seen more as a test of the will of the standing of individual parties than a desire for us to extend the natural belief in multipartism to local practice.
There seems to be a running consensus among the main parties that at least MMDCs should be elected. That's good consensus enough.
MMDCs should be elected, but then if you don't go through the whole gamut, I raise the point of that the MMDC is a representative of the central government at the district. So how does an NDC, MMDC elected by his constituents become the representative of the central government, which happens to be MPP? Or how does an MPP MMDC become the representative of central government, which happens to be NDC? One needs to look, you cannot pick and choose. You need to look at the whole gamut of what needs to be done. And more importantly, because some people are finding an excuse in the fact that certain corrective measures are not already being seen as part of the amendments to, let's say, bills in Parliament, and they've been promised as, oh, we'll do it after the event. It creates unnecessary mistrust. We should look at the whole of the decentralizing chapter of the Constitution, and then try and bring it into line with our desire and that we want multi-party governance extended to all levels of our societies. And then it shouldn't, then you can ask the the committee, the parliamentary committee on legislation and whatever, to look at it and draft the necessary changes and amendments and put this before Parliament, where it shall be adopted by consensus. And then you find that there will be no intellectual, interesting though it may be, intellectual discussion about what should be yes or what should be no. It's wonderful hearing the great heavyweights debate this whole issue. But at the end of the day, what is it going to achieve? It's not going to get the 75% to get the constitution changed, and the output of no may be completely misconstrued as something which is in favor of a certain political dispensation or trend. So I really think that much as I would like to discuss the yes and no of the whole argument, I don't really see it as the central issue we are facing now.
Well, we told you that we'll be joined by the Executive Director for IDEC, and Dr. Emmanuel Akwite is already seated. If there was one question that you would all say you agree on, what would that be in this whole central debate with Dr. Akwite and the rest of the civil society team? And now it looks like all of us have joined in, really. And that question is to you, Dr. Rekubobi.
Okay, good morning, Emmanuel. I don't know what Emmanuel, I know Emmanuel very well, but I don't know what he's thinking. I haven't got insights into his mind, but I would have thought that the suggestion of maybe a temporary halt to re-look at the whole thing and the way in which it has been put out, and then try to achieve consensus, and then go back to do the necessary amendments both in the House and to the whole country, might be a very, very useful exercise. I mean, unfortunately, we are at the end of 2019, and to all intents and purposes, the competition for next year's general election has started. And many, many things which we may desire that we think are necessary, may be misconstrued and be looked at in the context of the political contest that will be coming a year from now. I would have wished that such an exercise had taken place the year after a general election, when everybody's eyes was not fixed on the next pugilistic contest as to who wins power. But my suggestion would be, let's take a breather, sleep over it, enjoy our Christmas chickens, come back, convene a national conference, and then the results of that can be put into the necessary legislation and the necessary amendments made and changes achieved.
Well, thank you for joining us, Dr. Emmanuel Quartey. What do you make of the contribution of Dr. Charles Waku-Bobe? It's not really about a yes and no issue. The system will be for us ultimately. How we make it should be the consensus that is needed. And that's the position he's taken this morning.
Yes, I was wondering why you made me drive all the way here, because he said it all. I mean, first of all, good morning, sir. The second point is that I missed a lot of what he said because I couldn't hear that.
Good morning, Neymar.
Yes, but the important thing has been made. It's not the yes and no is reducing an important issue. We want to get away from partisanship and polarization, but the yes and no plays out partisanship and polarization. For example, when we got involved and said, look, the yes campaign is important because we must reform local governance. And if we reform local governance, it's also going to solve problems even at the central level. We knew there was consensus between the MPP and the NDC. We've been talking to them in Parliament and outside Parliament for the last 2 years and so on. So it urged that. But once one of them stepped out and said, I'm urging a no vote, we thought, look, there could be some conversations and resolving whatever issues, but you need to communicate. And if you are not there and then you're playing it out into the field, into the open space, that makes it difficult. So we were getting back into the partisan thing. It's as if it was a dress rehearsal, or it has become a dress rehearsal towards 2020, but presidential and parliamentary elections. But if you look at it critically, there are different groups here involved, and it might appear that sometimes we are told, oh, the no campaign is winning. I do not think it is the case necessarily. I think that there's a vocal minority which has tools of communication, whether social media or are able to use media houses and so on, putting a view across, which views can be debated at length. But what separates them from what I call the silent majority is that they have been very categorical. They do not want 55.3 touched at all, preserve it as it is. They are showing anti-political party or partisan politics attitude. We don't want the parties, but they are also not saying dissolve the parties. And then they are telling us that once you open MMDCs to elections, individuals can campaign. But they are not telling us about how to reform the system. You don't find reform on the agenda. You get a sense that they are positioning themselves to participate in the system that exists, and with a lot of assumptions that can be questioned or can be interrogated. We haven't had that. But the silent majority is saying that, hey, we are now hearing about referendum. We were told it's for MMDC elections. Now they say no MMDC, and parties are coming in, and we are scared, and so on. The idea of reform, which is what Mr. Waku-Bobe was putting across, hasn't gotten through to many people. In fact, that is what is making the difference. They are saying, give us more time. We don't know this because everything we've heard was different. And now they need to know, they want to know what reforms will come. How is it going to impact their lives? What is going to change? And so on. And some feel strongly that they are not being listened to. The information they need to make the decision at the polls isn't coming through forcefully or adequately or intensively and widespread. And yet the dates are getting closer. So they are talking about, can't we hold on a little to have this education? So when you put that together, you find out that probably if it is education they need, and probably a review will lead to putting together an apparatus, a machinery, okay, that could more effectively disseminate information to them, educate, also take their views and explain. I believe that it's going to move people. That's our own experience. It's going to move people to the center ground that says, oh, some reforms are coming to change the system, and we can improve local government and local self-government, and we can see development, improvement in public service delivery. Okay, the interval of about 2 to 4 years, if you're taking the assembly elections, probably the next assembly elections will be 2023. So in the interval, reforms will take place. And the parties we are seeing today are not the same parties that are going. I use the term, you know, in a very jovial way that we are likely to see born-again parties, and we are likely to see new parties, and with a framework, financing, elections, even regulation, a regulatory authority that is looking at parties on non-electoral issues and so on, which obtains in other places. All this will come about. So if going forward, I think that if it's the silent majority we should listen to, it shouldn't take us a year or something. I think a couple of months, where some have suggested 3 months, February, because of the elections, you can't go beyond. If the machinery for education is placed, if a team that would engage on both sides is also in place, and they are putting all the pressure, and the public is also adding its voice, I think in the critical areas, consensus probably could be built, but many more would come to accept the idea.
What you categorize as a silent majority, you don't think that inherent in the consensus or the opinion they share or sentiment could be a certain wariness of the political party activism and its related polarity or polarization that we've witnessed in the Fourth Republic? They want the parties, at the same time they also seem to dread what really goes on and accompanies its effect.
Yes, you're right. But the whole idea of 55-3 is that 55-3 has contributed to the polarization, to the partisanship. But multi-party politics is not necessarily, it should be this crude partisanship. No. And this exclusion, which even goes against the Constitution. Chapter 6 says you cannot discriminate against anybody, any Ghanaian. So the idea that you can identify somebody or think you can perceive their political persuasion, and that disqualifies them, competency out. All that matters is, I think you are part of my party. And we've seen the results. It's not working. It's not working for us. So, but what they need is to understand is the reforms that will precede any parties getting into local government. And when parties get in, they also guarantee the civil and political liberties of individuals. Individuals could assemble, they can contest elections. Probably we now need to look at the law and say, look, why can't small parties look local? Why should they have this national character which says 2/3 offices across districts, 260, at a time that probably their office could be on a phone, smartphone, you know, for them to engage. So technology has improved. We've seen the effects of this system. It's not working for us. It's actually putting the whole system at risk of violence and threat. Okay, so let us listen to that and say, for the sake of the silent majority, and also for the need for us to tighten up whatever consensus had been, what are the areas of the disagreement, and so on. Probably the idea of conference is interesting, but I think we should have, for me, the 3 months made sense. The reason is this. You need a political leader with resolve to push through very major constitutional reforms, not in numbers. This 55-3 is probably the most strategic. If you touched it, you are touching many things. Okay, but you need a leader to back it. And that leader is going to have some of his powers taken. Real devolution would have to take place. if you lose that leadership, you have to wait till another leader who would come. Because we've seen leaders in the past who couldn't push for the constitutional amendment. The second thing, too, is that if we decide that, oh, we should indefinitely, we should wait into the future, we also have real risks. If we want to deal with the political related violence or the so-called winner takes all, you need to go into constitutional amendment. And things are not getting, if you look at the trend from 2008, the escalation of the threat grows by the day to the point that
it's
now
just been ascending.
It's been ascending. And how do you contain it? Even the security agencies are now complaining. The police say, hey, if you don't do something, I cannot hold this anymore. A quick pass. We need more tools, more money, and so on. So let us have the courage.
Okay.
And with this combination of factors and the work that has already been done, I think we should be able to move forward.
Now let's go back to Dr. Charles Reku-Borbeh. You've been listening in closely. Now, the argument about how we could have localized or even minority parties also becoming strong at the local level. If you look at what the pattern has been, we've only had one or two other independent candidates winning an election or two in the Fourth Republic, and you've had notably the CPP or the PNC emerging in some notable areas. But even the last election has shown us that the numbers and the precedent just don't add up about how we could have third or fourth forces beyond the NPP and NDC. And that's a problem. So we could end up Northern Volta or some other related regions being NDC, and NPP also having those related areas in wins at that local level if it's made partisan. And that's the fear for those who claim that they are neutrals and advocating a no. What do you make of it?
Can I just say something about this so-called silent majority? The important point is that whether there is a majority for yes and is silent, will it pass the smell test of 75%? And to be honest with you, given the postures of the two main parties, I do not think that we will achieve 75% majority, whether one believes there's a silent majority for yes or not. And therefore, you know, for me, it's a fruitless exercise when you know what the end result will be, given that the two political giants in this country are in diametrically opposite side of the argument. Secondly, you know, there are very important structural issues that need to be addressed. The role of the incumbent president appointing 30% of the district assembly. How do you square that with multi-party contest at the local level? The issue I raised earlier, the fact that you expect the DC to be the representative of the central government. I think there are a whole gamut of structural changes which must be made to Amendment 24 to the chapter on decentralization, and a consensus and agreement reached. And then we can all do as has happened to the very many amendments that have been made to the Constitution. They've all been nodded through by consensus. In the 27 years I've observed the Fourth Republic, I think this is the first amendment that has become so mad in political controversy. All the rest have been achieved because there has been a common view of why the change was being made, and or at least in the first parliament of the Fourth Republic, the incumbent party had control because the opposition boycotted the election. So I'm not sure about, you know, this whole thing of short postponement. At the end of the exercise, will the exercise one way or the other, or let's say the yes, will it achieve the two basic tests, 40% turnout and 75% yes? I don't believe it will. So I think we really have to look at what it is we are trying to achieve. If somebody says to me that the silent majority can make up to 75%, then they are lucky.
It's getting the numbers. Yes, please come in.
Okay, thank you very much. I think for me, it's not just, I do agree. We emphasize consensus because we want the 75 yes and the 40% minimum. But I also feel that we should not allow ourselves to say that we can only get our parties to agree on things when one has lost elections or is in a position of some weakness to go through this. I think there's a foundation on which we can build. Both parties talked about this to a large extent. We worked with them and we understood what the issues are. The kind of issues that were raised subsequently that were led to the split, I think form part of the procedure are very important, but you have to ask yourself, this referendum is article is different from the articles that were amended quietly. This is system transforming. It's the second national referendum since 1992, the promulgation of the Constitution. And so it's quite primary and major, okay? So that is why you are likely to see these differences. But the issues that they have raised, I think that some dialogue has to be open. Some conversation has to be opened. And it has to be open with statesmen like maybe Mr. Reku Brobe, so it's not going to be like who have worked with both sides and know them. And that conversation must not be left to be picked up after the elections. Nobody knows the outcome of the elections and what the priorities would be. For me, the moment that we have a president, unless the issues overwhelm and he loses his resolve, we must write on that resolve and bring them back to the table. The pressures from various groups, for instance, the chiefs came out and said no. Now, when you read their statement, the chiefs' fear is that they will be sidelined. Okay. And then you also go into other groups and the issues they are raising. Some bargaining is important. How do you guarantee us and so on? Interestingly, there have been a number of suggestions and proposals around. What I felt difficult to understand is that this procedure of constitutional amendment, 55.3 referendum, it looks as if without opening it, okay, without the authorization of the people, 1991-92 was different. The government in
the structure and atmosphere was different.
They had the whole scope. They didn't take many things on board. They silenced, they drove it the way they wanted. Now you can't. But I thought that because an authorization, approval has to be given through the referendum, that opens the door. And the interval provides a space within which now, for instance, the 30%, there has been a lot of suggestions on the table. We, for instance, we've done meetings with the chiefs. The last seminar we held with chiefs was in a Mansfield Grand Hotel in April. Otherwise, since 2014, we've gone around the country. We got a very interesting idea from a group of chiefs in Takrad, and so who came up with the idea and said, look, this giving us 30% into the assembly where people are popularly elected and so on might have its merits, but also serious demerits. What about replicating a kind of a council of state structure where the chiefs and the professionals who never got into the assembly, although that was the idea, could there be a structure that would now bring them together to engage? And how do you define that in law, in the policy, in the framework, in the institution, and so on? We worked on it a bit, quite a bit, and then saw that, look, this can be done too, but you need to build some consensus. Nobody had taken up some of these proposals because the constitutional amendment is not on the table, amendment of the article. So I do agree with Dr. Reku Brobe on how he sees us going forward. I think where we probably have some variation is in whether we can come back and take this up after the 2020 election, or we should keep the process, sustain it.
Keep the momentum.
Keep the momentum and see what agreements can be arrived at. If, for instance, as he says, you decide that, look, let's extend this, and within the extension period, you can do the conference. And we can put pressure on our parties. I think sometimes we can put pressure on them. They depend on our vote, and they will listen to us at some point if we're really serious. So the silent majority I'm talking about is also the people who, in spite of the parties telling them vote this way, are now asking for more information to understand what it is that is coming. And they could also say, maybe it's important for us to do this. Would we come to a certain agreement between them, a consensus, that let's stop here and let's move after, which becomes some kind of a binding thing, committed thing. If we don't have these structures in place and we just leave it in anticipation that after the elections, you know, they will come back automatically, it won't work. If a president doesn't convene, had President Ivan Satamels, the late president, asked for CRC, put CRC in place, the demand for constitutional amendment started already in 1999 or earlier. But he put it on table when he saw the threat of violence and what to do with it. And then after him, the CRC became something that, you know, they couldn't find the consensus to even move it forward. Then we now have a president who said, okay, my 2431, yes, but I think that this whole system needs to be reformed. And I think for me is the leadership that brings about constitutional amendment from Rawlings today. That makes me feel that we probably would be running too high a risk if we left it to after the elections without having some elite consensus on the way forward, even after the elections. Let's bring them together. This is what my thinking is.
Dr. Rakubabe, what do you make of the opinion of a so-called silent majority? It looks like they are silent on the minority side, but have the numbers on opinion on the majority side. But if you look at the consensus building and where we can do the observational survey to get to know what the consensus is, will be greatly comment on mainstream and social media and other surveys that are conducted on that. You get to find that there are people, well-meaning people, who even within the parties that are arguing for or against, really have opinion and fears about the politicization. What do you make of it?
I don't think, you know, let me say it again, it shouldn't be about repoliticization. We have elected that the Fourth Republic of Ghana, the governance of it, and the elections and everything else will be through multi-party democracy. By a quirk of the history that we've had, we inherited participation at the local level, which was non-partisan. Now, we either get into a very fundamental debate as to whether we want non-partisanship at the local level forever, or we find a way in which the extension of multi-party democracy to the grassroots level can be done in a way that satisfies the interests of all of us. I agree that maybe the opportunity might be lost if we are not careful about the fact that for the first time we have a political party, we have a political president who says, I'm willing to give my power to appoint DCs. But then I go back and they say, well, when the idea was first mooted by the president, his own party kicked against it. And I remember the General Secretary actually coming out against it. So I think we need to reach consensus. I agree with Dr. Emmanuel Kote that, look, postponing it for a long time may lose out the initiative. But the issue is that once this year is over, whether we like it or not, 2020 is the political season. So maybe IDEC might be the host that will convene a national conversation very quickly in January or February, at which all kinds of interested parties, especially the two giant political protagonists, might be encouraged to jaw and reach a consensus on how we are going to achieve the extension of multi-party democracy to the grassroots level. That, for me, is the more important thing that should engage our mind than whether it is better to vote yes or no, or the arguments are more in favor of yes or no. Because at the end of the day, this is where I put on my engineer's hat. The question is, will anybody achieve the 75%? No. And for me, based on the current kind of very, very toxic discussion going on, it will not be achieved.
Yeah, and those are the fears we have. And thank you very much for contributing to the discussion. I've enjoyed it. Yesterday when we mooted the idea of having you as a statesman, but an engineer, contribute to the political discourse. We just went back and forth. And it was a good conclusion my producer did. And Dr. Charles Rekubrobe, Chief Policy Analyst, but also a great statesman, former VRA Chief Executive, and joining us there. But that'll be it from him this morning. But yes, if we have to conclude, where do we, one, pick up from where the current debate is and the atmosphere we've created? Two, what time frame do we have to make sure that we keep the momentum going? Because if you look at evolution, we have institutions of leadership that are already in the structure of society that need to move things. They govern, no matter what we think. If we look at a recent history in the world, we've had the springs, the Arab Spring, what's going on even in the US, etc. Hong Kong is there. But you get to find that after the whole atmosphere of the heat of what the people claim that they want, the end result, even relating to Brexit, doesn't become what really they wanted after all.
Well, that is true. I think that we do not have a great track record in the Fourth Republic of building consensus, okay, between our two major parties, which now everybody calls duopoly. They are like two monopolies.
Well, they are.
Yes, and so we haven't had that. But fortunately, the president's leadership is there, his resolve. But also, you find that across the parties, there are groups actually converging. The consensus goes beyond. It's within the two parties, at least in Parliament. Okay, and I believe the wider group, Dr. Rekubrobe was talking about when the president first mooted the idea and how his own party, went against it. But that is what makes 55-3 interesting, that it's truly a national thing. You see, it's not partisan. He looked beyond that. That is how we've seen it, and all the research and the conversations. It's really a national thing to deal with problems that might not inure to the party's interest, and the party was scared. But where we are now, whether they like it or not, they have now moved into a yes campaign that commits them, okay, to this amendment as a national agenda. The NDC did that earlier. Okay, if you look at the debate of 29 July, where they unconditionally said, we'll support this, and they wanted it to be the first. Somehow, we couldn't go there because there was an impasse. And a discussion had taken place to resolve the impasse. Okay, and in fact, the parties were about to come up with it when the NDC pulled out. But that notwithstanding, it doesn't change the fact that the two parties have come to a point that they see that they coming together to make reforms in the Constitution would open up the political space, will push us more towards development, we'll have the stability we need, and there will be hope for our people, because local economies will be developed. Groups that have been marginalized, not only the chiefs, women have been marginalized, they never got their 30%, and yet the competencies in that sector that could be brought to bear on local government, phenomenal. Youth, in some countries. But
only through political parties?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
The design of the system would have to take into account not only when political parties come in, they also create space for other groups. That's what you should know. That is why transition from PNDC to the Fourth Republic, you see, immediately so many changes were made. It is the parties that drive that. They are independent autonomous organizations. They contest for state power, and to get them to work together, you have to do quite a lot and also protect them. But once you do that, the political and civil liberties of minorities, individuals, and so on are also protected. So let's get back to the conversation. Do we now move multi-party, not partisan? Partisan politics is different from multi-party. This is partisan because it's two parties, they polarize us. They are not different from how the Dan Kwabuzia tradition from UP, the CPP, and then NDC tradition, whatever it is, they alternate power. They hardly work together. Whenever there is an impasse over something, they boycott. They wouldn't come to the table, and so on. So the elite consensus, building elite consensus, has not been our strength. What I think, drawing on Dr. Rekubrobe's quite insightful comment is that if we feel that a better time to do the referendum, would be after elections, then it has to be, the groundwork for it must be laid now. And if you take the referendum from the table completely, they wouldn't come to the table to talk.
At all.
So let us, in the national interest, get them together. I think, how do we bring them together? It still must be on the table. People say, we want to know. 3 months can change a whole lot. And with that education, we can also put more pressure on them to do things in the national interest, on both sides, and probably begin to now have the structure that is going to look at the specific proposals of how the youth will get in, how individuals can contest, how chiefs and how communities will not be only parties governing them, and so on and so forth.
I'm just thinking, if you look at the structure of the bigger MMDAs, it becomes even difficult if you want to be the head, not contesting behind a party. It definitely has got to be a party.
Yes, it's got to be, but parties, we must admit, these two parties have also played too far to the extreme.
You are saying that no matter what we think, they dominate the country.
They have dominated, but we need reforms. We need laws and a framework that would also make us deal with some of their excesses. Yeah. It's very important.
And to make it more representative.
To make it more representative and open spaces for smaller and other parties.
Well, we'll see where the argument goes, but it looks like IDEG and the rest of civil society, they have more work to do. We'll see how we are able to pick up the pieces, if there are any pieces at all. Dr. Emmanuel Akwete, thank you for joining us. We pull you out of bed and the office to come here this morning and had to restructure your appointment this morning. Dr. Emmanuel Akwete is the Executive Director of the Institute for Democratic Governance, IDEG, helping us again comprehensively bring the issues to the table. Has been doing that for the last couple of weeks. It's a lot of work he has to do alongside his colleagues as well. Indeed, all the parties. But we told you about this morning. If you have more comments, let us know about what you think. So far, what you've been hearing, what you've heard this morning as well. I'm sure that this debate will still continue until we get to some decision point in the near future, if not the next couple of days. But let's move on. Uncle Ebo White, that is the Roverman production. They have a new play. And it's all about what if all your prayers and wishes were granted? What if those wishes and prayers, as well as of everyone else, were also answered? Will that be a haven for paradise or hell? Well, a small struggling community is about to discover why wise people say, be careful what you really wish for. And that's what Uncle Ebo White is presenting in his newest play. It's titled, God, You Are Fired. And it shows us what happens in a world where wishes become horses and everyone is just finding some leeway to hide. So the Roverman production, they are represented. They're telling us all that insightful discussion on the play. Next, stay with us.